There is a version of history we have quietly accepted, one in which the people who came before us were desperate, malnourished, and barely surviving. We imagine medieval peasants hunched over thin gruel, bodies ravaged by cold and illness, grateful for anything they could scrape together before the frost took everything. We have been taught, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that the history of human eating is a long march toward the supermarket, that everything before refrigeration was suffering, that everything before processed food was scarcity. That version of history is not entirely wrong, but it is missing something essential, and what it is missing may explain more about the modern body's suffering than almost any clinical study published in the last 50 years. The idea that survival requires abundance is a modern illusion. For most of human history in Europe and early America, survival depended on the opposite: restraint, repetition, and a deep familiarity with a handful of simple ingredients. Meals were not crafted for pleasure or variety. They were engineered, quietly and unconsciously, for endurance. The modern table is filled with choices. The medieval table was filled with certainty. And it is precisely that certainty, built from only 2 or 3 humble components, that carried entire populations through winters that would break most people today. What we have forgot is not just the meals themselves. It is the logic behind them. The modern narrative tells us that nutrition is complex. We are taught to believe that health requires diversity, colorful plates, superfoods imported across oceans, precise macronutrient ratios, and an ever-expanding list of vitamins and supplements. Food labels have become a language of their own, full of percentages and scientific claims that promise control over the body. Doctors and public health authorities emphasize balance. Variety is presented as a cornerstone of good nutrition. The more diverse your diet, the argument goes, the more likely you are to meet your body's needs. This reasoning appears sound. After all, the human body requires dozens of nutrients, each playing a role in metabolism, immunity, and cellular repair. It seems logical that a wide range of foods would be necessary to supply them. Supermarkets reinforce this belief. Entire aisles are devoted to specialized products, protein bars, fortified cereals, plant-based alternatives, and fortified drinks. Each promises efficiency, convenience, and scientific precision. There is comfort in this system. It gives the impression that nutrition can be managed externally, through selection and purchase. It reduces the uncertainty of survival to a series of consumer choices. But beneath this surface lies a contradiction. If variety is essential, how did entire societies survive, often with remarkable resilience, on diets that rarely changed? In medieval Europe, most people ate the same meals day after day, year after year. The concept of dietary diversity, as we understand it today, simply did not exist for the majority of the population. And yet these populations endured winters that brought months of cold, darkness, and scarcity. They labored physically, often outdoors, with limited protection from the elements. Their survival was not theoretical. It was immediate and unforgiving. The explanation cannot be dismissed as mere luck or genetic advantage. There was a system at work, one rooted in simplicity rather than complexity. A system that modern thinking has largely abandoned. To understand this system, one must step back into the rhythm of pre-industrial life. In a medieval village, food was not an abstract concept. It was a direct extension of the land, the season, and the labor required to sustain it. What you ate was determined not by preference, but by availability and preservation. Winter was the defining challenge. From late autumn until early spring, fresh food became scarce. Fields lay dormant, and livestock could not be slaughtered indiscriminately without jeopardizing future survival. What remained were stores, carefully prepared during the harvest months to last through the cold. These stores were not elaborate, They were practical. Grains such as barley, oats, and rye formed the backbone of the diet. They were hardy, could be stored for long periods, and provided sustained energy. Root vegetables, turnips, carrots, parsnips were kept in cellars, protected from freezing. Legumes, especially peas and beans, were dried and preserved. Animal products were used sparingly but strategically. Fat, in particular, was highly valued. It provided dense energy and could be stored in forms such as lard or suet. Milk, when available, was often fermented into cheese or butter, extending its shelf life. From these ingredients came meals of striking simplicity. A pot of pottage, perhaps the most common dish of medieval Europe, might contain only three elements: a grain, a legume, and a vegetable. Sometimes a small amount of fat or bone would be added for flavor and nourishment. It was not a meal designed to impress. It was a meal designed to sustain. Another example is oat porridge, a staple in Scotland and parts of northern England. Made from oats, water, and occasionally a pinch of salt, it provided warmth and steady energy. It could be eaten fresh or allowed to cool and solidify, then sliced and carried into the fields. Bread, often made from rye or barley rather than refined wheat, served as both food and utensil. A coarse loaf, paired with cheese or a smear of animal fat, constituted a complete meal. In early America, particularly in rural New England, similar patterns emerged. Cornmeal replaced European grains, forming the basis of dishes like mush or johnny cake. Beans and salted pork were combined in simple stews that could be left to cook slowly over a fire. These meals were not varied, but they were reliable. And reliability, in a harsh winter, was the difference between survival and starvation. The effectiveness of these meals lies in principles that modern nutrition often overlooks. First, there is the concept of satiety, the ability of food to satisfy hunger over time. Medieval meals were built around ingredients that digest slowly. Whole grains, legumes, and fats create a gradual release of energy, preventing the sharp fluctuations in blood sugar that are common with modern processed foods. Second, there is nutrient density within simplicity. While these meals may appear limited, they often contained a balance of essential nutrients. Grains provided carbohydrates and certain proteins. Legumes added additional protein and fiber. Vegetables contributed vitamins and minerals. Animal fats supplied energy and fat-soluble vitamins. Fermentation played a critical role as well. Many foods were preserved through natural fermentation, which not only extended shelf life, but also enhanced digestibility. Fermented dairy, for example, contains beneficial bacteria that support gut health. Even the practice of slow cooking had scientific implications. Long simmering breaks down tough fibers and connective tissues, making nutrients more accessible to the body. The human digestive system evolved in an environment where food was consistent and predictable. Repetition allowed the body to adapt, optimizing the production of enzymes needed to process specific foods efficiently. In contrast, the modern diet introduces constant variation. While this may seem beneficial, it can also create instability in digestion and metabolism. There is a quiet efficiency in eating the same simple meals regularly, an efficiency that medieval populations relied upon, without fully understanding its biochemical basis. The transition away from these systems did not happen suddenly. It was driven by a combination of technological advancement, economic incentive, and cultural change. As societies industrialized, food production shifted from local and seasonal to centralized and continuous. Preservation methods evolved from natural processes like drying and fermentation to techniques designed for mass distribution, such as canning and chemical preservation. Refinement became a defining characteristic of modern food. Grains were stripped of their outer layers to produce white flour, increasing shelf life but reducing nutrient content. Sugar, once a rare luxury, became widely available and heavily used. Fats were processed and altered to improve stability and texture. These changes were not inherently malicious. They were solutions to real problems, feeding growing populations, reducing spoilage, and increasing convenience. But they also introduced a new set of challenges. Food became less about sustenance and more about consumption. Variety increased, but so did the distance between the eater and the source of their food. The simple, three-ingredient meals that once sustained entire communities were gradually replaced by complex products with long ingredient lists and short preparation times. In this transformation, something was lost. Not just specific recipes, but a way of thinking about food. Inside the modern body, the consequences of this shift are subtle but significant. When food is highly processed, it often requires less effort to digest. This might seem beneficial, but it can lead to rapid absorption of sugars and a corresponding spike in blood glucose levels. The body responds by releasing insulin, a hormone that helps regulate blood sugar. Frequent spikes in blood sugar and insulin can, over time, lead to metabolic strain. Energy levels fluctuate. Hunger becomes less predictable. The sense of fullness that once followed a simple meal becomes harder to achieve. In contrast, the slow-digesting foods of medieval diets create a more stable internal environment. Energy is released gradually, supporting sustained activity and reducing the likelihood of sudden hunger. There is also the matter of gut health. The human digestive system is home to a vast community of microorganisms, collectively known as the microbiome. These microorganisms play a crucial role in breaking down food, synthesizing certain vitamins, and supporting immune function. Traditional diets, rich in fiber and fermented foods, tend to support a diverse and balanced microbiome. Modern diets, often lower in fiber and higher in processed ingredients, can disrupt this balance. The result is not always immediate or dramatic. It manifests as a general decline in resilience, subtle changes in energy, digestion, and overall well-being. The body adapts, but not always in ways that serve long-term health. The solutions are not hidden in distant lands or obscure traditions. They are embedded in the very practices that sustained European and early American populations for centuries. Returning to these principles does not require abandoning modern life. It requires a shift in perspective. Simplicity can be reintroduced. Meals built around a few whole ingredients, grains, legumes, vegetables, and modest amounts of fat, can provide the same stability that once carried people through harsh winters. Cooking methods can be adjusted. Slow cooking, fermentation, and basic preservation techniques are not relics of the past. They are tools that remain accessible and effective. There is also value in repetition. Eating similar meals regularly allows the body to establish a rhythm. It reduces the cognitive burden of constant choice and creates a sense of familiarity that is often missing in modern diets. This is not about restriction. It is about alignment, bringing the way we eat closer to the way the human body has been conditioned to function over centuries. The enduring lesson of these forgotten meals is not that the past was superior. It is that survival once depended on understanding limits. Medieval and early American populations did not have the luxury of abundance. They worked within constraints, and in doing so, they developed systems that were both efficient and resilient. Modern society has largely removed these constraints. We can eat almost anything at any time in any quantity. This freedom is unprecedented, but it also comes with a cost. Without limits, it becomes easy to lose sight of what is necessary. The three-ingredient meals that sustained generations were not born of choice, but of necessity. Yet within that necessity, there was a kind of wisdom, a recognition that the body does not require endless variation to function well. It requires consistency, balance, and respect for the processes that sustain it. This is the quiet truth that has been largely forgotten. Not that we should return to the hardships of the past, but that within those hardships were solutions, simple, enduring, and remarkably effective.